Hello Magic players, Maelstrom MTG here, and today we're going to be talking about a very fun deck, and I'm not going to be going over a deck tech of this deck. I already have, and I'll leave it in the description. But today, we're going to be talking about Bogles as an archetype, and I just want to say, thank you Bogles. Like, you're the hero to so many different metagame shakeups that really you don't get enough praise. Now, Bogles is, if you don't know, Bogles is a deck where you land a hexproof creature on turn 1 and then place a bunch of enchantments on that creature and just keep swinging in. And you can get a lot of extra value through cards that give it lifelink, cards that give it extra lives, cards that just pump it up, cards that give it protection from creatures. Really, it does so much. And it used to be really popular, and then it kind of got shoved off to the side, and I want to talk about why that is. Because Bogles is a very uninteractive deck, which doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. Bogles is a very uninteractive deck where you quite often win game 1, at least. And so, I want to talk about why that is. I want to talk about why it's only 2% of the metagame, why it doesn't see play outside of metagame shakeups. Now, Bogles is an archetype that really, it's really meant to be I really love this deck, and it's really meant to be, like, a sign to Magic players, a symbol, and so I like the deck not necessarily for what it is, but for what it means. And so, in metagames like Modern, eventually we keep collecting cards from Standard. Eventually a card's going to get busted, eventually something's going to have to get banned, and recently we had 5 cards banned, and that's an insane amount of bannings for one ban. And so, I want to talk about what that does. What that does is it actually shakes up the metagame, and the metagame being shaken up means that control decks will no longer know what they need to beat. So what that does is it gives aggro decks a time to shine, and so the biggest decks that profited off of the bannings were Blitz, Hammer Time Burn as aggro decks, Spirits as an aggressive creature control-y deck, Death and Taxes as a little more, well, it's more of the control-y aspect of creature control, but it is still kind of a creature control deck. And then also decks like Death Shadow that are very, very aggressive. And then we have things like, down there we have Dredge as an aggro deck. People argue that it's a combo deck, but if you really think about it, it really fits better under aggro. And then we have things like Bogles and Humans. Those are both super aggressive. Now, Bogles is a very powerful deck that comes into existence when the metagame is primarily aggro based. It can be a little iffy if your opponent is able to deal with your Boggle, because in a control deck, there are ways to deal with a hexproof creature, where in Modern, the most common type of way to deal with the threat is obviously going to be spot removal. It's Path to Exile, Assassin's Trophy, Lightning Bolt, any of those things. Honestly, even Teferi Time Raveler can bounce one thing, but none of those get past hexproof, which is where control would come in with board wipes, making them sacrifice things. That would be more of a black-red kind of thing, or bouncing stuff to their owner's hand, like all of their things. So, really, it's more of an aggressive style deck, and it can really just sweep the competition if you're going against Burn, Hammer Time, or Blitz. Now, Hammer Time is a bit more difficult of a matchup just purely because it's practically doing what we're doing, which is why we're running things like Path to Exile in most of our lists, and that is why Bogles is so well positioned right now. Bogles is able to do something that a lot of decks can't compensate for, And so, again, thank you, Bogles. You give us a solution to a metagame that is primarily aggro-based. You give us a reason why we can't just all play Burn. We can't all play Blitz. We can't all play Hammer Time. You give us an excuse to play the decks we want to play without risking. Because if we have to all say, okay, I guess we're all playing Burn now, the metagame's not going to be fun. The game's not going to be fun. We're going to have to go do something else. Burn versus Burn, I've played it so many times, is not a fun matchup. It's not because it's just super taxing to both players. It's just it's not very interesting. And so Burn itself is a decent deck. It's a deck that you can have a lot of fun playing. But when it's the mirror match, quite often with a lot of other decks, the mirror match is not a fun deck and not a fun game. It's just not interesting. And so Bogles gives us the excuse of, okay, we have to be ready to fight Bogles as well as compete in an aggro-based metagame, which opens up the gateway to being able to play more mid-rangey decks, more control-y decks. We have to be able to do that. So we can't just say, you know what, we're playing Burn, we're playing Hammer Time, we're playing Blitz. It gives us a reason to play the decks we actually want to play rather than decks that will win on turn 3 or turn 2. Not turn 2, but like win very, very aggressively. Now, I want to just say thank you, Bogles. You give us a reason to play what we want to play. And you yourself will not ever really take over the metagame. Bogles is the kind of deck that appears once in a while at a random tournament, or it'll appear after a metagame shakeup and never any other place. You can play Bogles as, if you get really good with Bogles, you can play it. Bogles has a very low skill floor, so it's very easy to learn. But if you can get really good with Bogles, you could just play Bogles. That could be your thing. Anyway, I just wanna go into talk about a few different lists you can do. I will actually be putting all 3 of these lists as well as the video that I recorded explaining Bogles more in depth of like what the actual deck is, not what it represents. And I'll be putting all of that in the description. And if you want to check that kind of content out, I have tons and tons of different modern decks, different modern deck techs. And if you want to see that, please let me know. Subscribe, hit that like button. Let me know that you're enjoying watching these videos if you are. And if you have any comments, let me know as well. And we're going to move right into these decks, and we're going to be talking about what they're doing differently, even though they're basically the same thing. So first up is the Modern on Budget deck that I recorded a few weeks ago. Now this is a Lurrus deck because Lurrus was practically free in the deck. The only card that wouldn't fit in here was Leyland's Sanctity, and you'll see that there's still some versions of the deck that do run it. But Bogles is this version of the deck you'll see did go above $100. I can almost guarantee you it's going to go right back down. It's going to go down to like $95. That's usually where it can rest. But whenever Bogles comes back into the metagame, the price rises a little bit, then it falls again. I've seen this happen a lot of times. I've only been playing Modern probably for 5-ish years, but I've seen that price go up and down and up and down whenever a Modern shakeup happens, whenever something gets released, whenever something gets banned. Bogles is there. So it could be something that you could play consistently, but it's also the kind of deck that you could keep for a rainy day when your combo deck, when your control deck, possibly even your aggro deck gets banned out. Quite often, though, the decks that receive these bannings are insane combo decks or control decks that have gotten too oppressive. And so, aggro decks are relatively safe, and so is Bogles. So, we're going to dive right into this. We do have Lurrus. The addition of Lurrus gave us the ability to replay our Bogles, even if our opponents managed to get rid of it. Also, it allowed us to play things from our graveyard if our Ethereal Armor, or Ethereal Armor is a common target, but if any of these were destroyed by Enchantment Destruction, quite often our opponent will bring in Enchantment Destruction and just try to destroy our enchantments, not necessarily our hexproof creature, but with Lurrus we can just replay them. The next list we have here is actually not my own. This is actually just one I took off of the metagame, website. And you'll see it has a Lurrus in the main board, and then in the sideboard, 4 Leyline Sanctities. You bring this in against sometimes hand hate. You bring this in again, well, quite often hand hate actually, because quite often you'll win on turn, you'll win game 1, and then they'll bring in hand hate, and so you want to make sure you keep your Boggle in your opening hand. But we do have Leyline here. I really like in the sideboard, and I really like being able to play Lurrus game 1. Anyway, you'll see that this has Path to Exiles rather than my deck has 2 Path to Exile and 2 Dromoka's Command. Dromoka's Command is a little more interactive with your opponent, and it can pump your own creature, and it has just a little more flexibility. And so for that reason, like especially sometimes these decks can struggle against depending on how many non-basic or basics you have in your deck. It can also just destroy Blood Moon if you need to. But we're going to move on. This one does have that Leyline Sanctity, and really the biggest difference between this deck and my modern on a budget one is that this has Dryad Arbor. It's a land, but you also have that Leyline of Sanctity, and then the lands are upgraded. But the lands don't need to be upgraded in this deck. This does perfectly fine. Next up is Lurrus Bogles, and this is a deck that I've been tinkering with, and this is by no means the tier 1 list. I don't think that Bobble will really stay in the list. I just really wanted to try it because I'm running Lurrus anyway, so I tossed in Bobbles, and it's really fun. I actually, in comparison to this list, I'm only running one fewer enchantment, and I'm not running any removal. That's the big difference. I took out my removal for Mishra's Bobble because I'm not really concerned right now in the metagame about the creatures I'm going against. If you were to play this longer term, I would 100% put Path to Exiles in here, go up maybe to like a second Spirit Link. But if you're going to play this more long term, but Mishra's Bobble is definitely a card I just really like. I don't need the removal; it would be decent, but this also gives me a guaranteed free play off of Lurrus every single turn, and so I really do like that. Anyway, those are really our 3 lists that we have. Some lists used to run Leyline Sanctity in the main, but ever since Lurrus got printed, it kind of like went away from doing that. You'll see I have 3 Leyline Sanctities here, and so really the deck is there to kind of like stop our opponents from playing so much aggro. And so for that, I want to say thank you one last time to Bogles, the hero of the modern shakeup, and you will never see long-term competitive play, but you will always be appreciated. Anyway, for those people who stayed until the end of the video, thank you. Please hit that thumbs up. Please hit that subscribe if you want to see more. If you want to see more content like this, if you want to see more deck techs, let me know. And if you have a cool idea or anything like that, let me know in comments. And also, what do you think of Bogles? Do you think Bogles could ever see a long-term game, long-term meta? Anyway, I will see you next time.